Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. How many of you are first-year students? Isn't that just wonderful? Good to see you all here. So my name is Paul Lakeland, and I am the director of the Center for Catholic Studies, which runs a whole lot of programs. And this is the first program of the academic year that we're sponsoring. Before we get to the program, and not so much for you, but for the many more people who are watching this online, I just have a word to say to them about question and answer. Obviously, at the end of the presentation, if you have questions and comments, you are going to be able to ask them in the usual way. If you are online, well, obviously you can't ask them in the usual way, but you do have the advantage of putting a question into the Q&A box whenever it pops into your mind. You don't have to wait till the end. So people online, you can place a question when you're ready, and our, what shall I call you? Our coordinator here, Caitlin, will be monitoring and managing those questions, so there'll be lots of opportunities. So don't wait till the end if you're online. Put the question in when you're ready. That's all I want to say. The very first event this year is the annual Canisius Academy Lecture, which is sponsored, managed, promoted, and handled by our distinguished Canisius Fellow, Professor Caitlin Merritt. So without any more ado, I hand over to her for the rest of the evening. Good to see you all here.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you all for attending the 5th Annual Canisius Academy Lecture. Canisius Academy is a student-driven organization that aims to engage contemporary Catholic issues. We are always looking for new voices to contribute to our conversations, and we are eager and excited for the conversations to begin for this academic year this evening. I'd like to give a word of thanks to the Center for Catholic Studies and Paul and Mary for all of your assistance in making tonight possible, as well as to Anthony and the media team who are supporting our media needs. Conversations about our selection for the 5th annual speaker began during the tumultuous exit of the United States from Afghanistan last year. Among the many questions that we were all asking was about the people who were left behind. People who had worked for justice and built hope were now faced with a very different reality. While the exit may now seem far away, the issues of immigration remain ever present in our society and have become not only a campaign issue on both sides of the aisle, but also, for better or worse, a campaign tool. Seeking a speaker who could discuss these issues on both the professional and personal level and is engaged daily with these issues made one speaker become very clear to us. The Canisius Academy and I are very humbled and excited to introduce Ronnate Asirwatham, our speaker this evening. Ronnate is Network's Director of Government Relations and is a lead lobbyist on immigration. She develops and executes strategies to advance the organization's Catholic social justice agenda on Capitol Hill and within the presidential administration. For those who are not familiar, Network is a national Catholic social justice lobby that was founded in 1971 by 47 Catholic sisters involved in education, healthcare, and other direct services. They saw in the progressive spirit of Vatican II to seek justice in the world and ignite hope. Network works to create a society that promotes justice and the dignity of all in the shared abundance of God's creation. So without further ado, let us welcome Ronnate.
Thank you everyone, and thank you for the Canisius Institute as well as Caitlin and Paul and everyone involved for inviting me today. I'm delighted to be here, and I didn't know that I was going to be the first in the year. Anyway, first I have to straighten one thing out. My topic is faith in action. but I will not be talking about anything related to theology. Someone I know heard that I was speaking at Fairfield and offered to help me with the theology. And I was like, theology? Who would ask me to speak on theology? I know nothing about it. But then, someone was like, oh, you work for a Catholic organization, you're speaking at a Catholic university, definitely they'll ask you about theology. I called Caitlin at once. She said, no, I don't have to speak about it. I know nothing about it, as I said. So, I am reassured, and I will speak about something that I do know a lot about. And that is advocacy. And the need for both faith and action to be successful in advocacy. All the stars in my presentation was, to be successful. So what is advocacy? In the simplest definition, any activity by an individual or group that aims to influence political, economic, and social and institutional decisions is advocacy. But when I speak about advocacy and the advocacy work that I do advocacy for social justice, where I work to change structures and institutions that oppress and create inequality. At this time, I work on federal advocacy in federal policy. So in my day-to-day job, I try to influence policymakers, practitioners, faith communities, students like you, and even faculty and other people. Right now, as Caitlin said, I work on immigration policy. It is huge, and we can discuss that a lot of what is happening on that. Before this, I also worked on foreign policy. How do I do this? How do I try to influence people? The actions that I take. I try to draft policy. I do draft policy. I draft letters. I advocate with Congress people, their staff directly and through coalitions. And that is the way we work together. Advocacy, by nature, is action. Whether it's a small action, like sending an email or writing a letter, or something that takes a bigger investment of time, such as meeting with your congressperson or organizing a rally or a teach-in. So advocacy is a lot of action. So then, where does the faith come in? Advocacy focuses on long-term change, and therefore usually takes a long time. Working on long-term advocacy means you're trying to change someone's mind, or you're trying to change institution that has been there for a long time. And you're trying to do this at the same time where you or the groups that you're talking to and you're trying to advocate with are suffering. It's an extreme heavy load that you carry. And then what it actually feels like is that if you're trying to dismantle a pillar while trying to keep the roof on, but still someone is like slapping your hands. This is the load that you carry if you work on advocacy for a long time. This is what you feel. So in this way, when you carry this sort of load, how are you able to stay the course? Where will you find the reserves of hope in those dark days when you feel you're not getting the outcome you want, or that a policy that you have been working for in 10 years is going to crumble in one day? That is when you need faith. And when I say faith, it could be faith in a religious tradition, or it could not be that. When I say faith for advocacy to be successful, number one, it is faith in the process of advocacy. And what I mean is one must have complete trust and confidence when one has faith. And in order for advocacy to be successful, must have complete trust and confidence in oneself, in faith, in other people, and also in the process of advocacy that itself, as I said, that it will work. Now let me tell you why I have faith in the advocacy process and why I believe that it works. I've been doing this for 10 years, so what else would I say? But actually, I have another reason. I was born on the island of Sri Lanka. Props for anybody who knows where that is. Okay. This is the island. This is a little tiny island, as y'all can see. All of the time that I call that island home, there was a civil war going on. While I grew up in a war-torn country, the area that I was living in did not have active fighting, so I went to school, I did other things regular children did. But I did see a lot of discrimination and a lot of inequality. And I decided that this was wrong. I decided that I needed to change it. My dream was to become a journalist, to shine a light on the stories of inequality. And I did realize that dream. I did become a journalist. But I soon realized that, too, that was not enough. Shining a light on it was not enough. If I wanted to be someone who helped change the system, who changed my life and also the lives of my fellow friends and family, then I needed to change policy. So I started working at Oxfam in Sri Lanka as a policy associate, working deep on policy and advocacy campaigns on issues of land and displacement after the Asian tsunami. However, in 2008, my life was to change dramatically. 1 year after I got married, my husband, who was a journalist, was arrested by the Sri Lanka government. He was tortured, he was held without charges for 6 months, and after 2 years of pre-trial detention, he was sentenced to 20 years of rigorous imprisonment for writing, which was deemed by the state as an act of terrorism. Before we go any further, let me assure you, he did not stay the 20 years in prison. He is now free. But he's only free because he was released. He was only free because of an international advocacy campaign. And that is the reason that I believe that advocacy works. This picture I think on the left of your screen is the day that he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. And the picture on the right of your screen is 5 years ago when he gave testimony in Congress. So you can see what advocacy does. As soon as he was detained in March of 2008, I knew deep down that I had little power vis-a-vis the state. But I had to build power. So I turned to advocacy. Had I not believed then in the power of advocacy, I would have given up much. I would have given up much earlier than those 2.5 years where it took to free my husband. At every stage, when I was working to free my husband, at every stage, the Sri Lankan government told me that speaking up was wrong and dangerous. Someone tried to abduct me while I was in Sri Lanka. I went to the police and asked them to investigate, and they did not. They simply harassed me more and more. And because of this, I had to flee. I am so grateful that I was able to flee and able to get asylum in the United States. And this is the story of many immigrants. The government of Sri Lanka at that time told me, when I was advocating for my husband's release, that they could not release him. And they could not release him because I was advocating, because I was speaking out. And when powerful voices constantly tell you these things, you tend to believe this. You tend to believe, you start thinking, oh my gosh, is it because I'm speaking out that he's in prison? Is he going to stay longer? Are they keeping him because of that? But then you ask yourselves those questions and you realize you don't have that power. The power that you have, that lies with you, is that you can raise your own voice and ask others to raise their voices with you. And this again, I will move again to faith and where, you find that faith. In those 2.5 years, as I said, it was a low, to say the least. And then there was always moments when I thought I reached my depths of resilience and needed reserves of hope. And that came to me both in my personal faith and my faith in others. In terms of personal faith, I am a Catholic. But at the time of such deep despair, I began to question my faith. Where is my God? Why is he doing this to me? What is happening? During that time, when my husband was in prison in Sri Lanka, the civil war had reached its military zenith. Civilians were trapped in war zones, and so was Oxfam staff. It was my job to try and contact them and to find out how they were doing, how could we help, how could Oxfam help. But because there was indiscriminate bombing and shelling, more often than not, our staff had to rush to a bomb shelter. And at that time, we did not know what happened to them. They all survived, but it was still, to say the least, it was unspeakable. But each time, my call, if it ended with them, where we could say goodbye, each time it ended, my colleagues would tell me, "Don't worry, we are praying for your husband." I was floored. Wow, who was I to be complaining? I really had much more. There were no bombs falling on my head. And so it is from the community, from the people, the other people, that I found sustenance to lift me up when I was down. I found faith in community. A second way faith in others is important for advocacy is because faith in others means that you believe people who you don't know need to be treated fairly. When you have faith in other people, you believe that injustice to one person means injustice to us all. Because we believe all humans have inherent dignity. We don't have to know people personally or even share their experiences to understand that any indignity to them is an indignity to us. Let me share a story of one person I feel that advocated with and for others because of a shared humanity, not shared experience. This is the story of Father Stan Swami, a Jesuit priest in India. Has anyone heard of him? Father Stan Swami was born in South India. He was not of the tribal peoples of India. He came from a middle-class family, went to school, and thereafter Jesuit college and seminary. He was well educated and a Jesuit scholar. Yet in the 1970s, when he was taking a train in India, he saw how the Indian tribal people were being treated by the Indian authorities. And he thought it was wrong. He thought that all people needed to be treated equally. So he moved from the city to an area where tribal people lived, learned from them about their own customs, he learned their language, and became an advocate for them and with them to amplify their voices. Here, I would like to show you this video, just 2 minutes, so that we know more about him.
For over 5 decades, Father Stan Swami, a Jesuit priest and human rights activist, has been working for India's most marginalized and vulnerable indigenous communities. On October 8th, Father Stan Swami was taken into custody by the National Investigation Agency in India. The NIA accuses him of personal links with the banned extremist groups of Maoists and Naxalites. 2 days before being taken into custody, Father Stan recorded this video to be released in case an arrest took place.
What is happening to me is not something unique happening to me alone. It's a broader process that is taking place all over the country. We are all aware how prominent intellectuals, lawyers, writers, poets, activists, student leaders, they are all put into jail just because they have expressed their dissent or raised questions about the ruling powers of India.
Father Xavier Jesuraj is the secretary for all the Jesuit social justice and ecology initiatives. He knows Father Stan personally and considers him a mentor. Father Xavier believes that the state is after him because of his dissent with several policies of the government, and says Father Stan is the one who raises the concerns of the voiceless people in India.
He has been a person who has been committed to the cause of the indigenous people in India. For all these 50 years in Jharkhand, the state where the majority are indigenous people, they have been deprived of their rights over their land. He has been standing with them to fight for their rights and calling for the state to give them their due rights. This has been his mission.
The Secretariat for Social Justice and Ecology is mobilizing other Jesuits and people worldwide to demand Father Stan Swami's immediate release.
The whole Society of Jesus is with him in solidarity. We want to say that we stand with the Stan, who has been standing with the people. So by standing with him, we want to say that we stand with the indigenous people and the Dalits.
The Jesuits recently held a day of solidarity with Father Stan Swami. Since then, peaceful demonstrations, meetings of solidarity, candlelight marches, and online campaigns have been held across India and the rest of the world.
Unfortunately, Father Stan Swami was never released. He died in prison for his beliefs that all people should be treated equally last year. He remains an inspiration to us all. When we advocate, let me try to fix this. There we go. When we advocate, we must advocate with and for others because of our shared humanity and compassion. Advocacy would not be successful if only immigrants or immigrant families spoke up for immigrants, if only journalists spoke up for journalists, and if only businessmen spoke up for businessmen. We would never get anywhere. We always have to work with others in coalition. When I advocate on immigration policy today, I hear so many immigrant advocates think that they are alone, especially Black immigrant advocates who feel that they are the only ones speaking out for Black immigrants. We have Gurleen Joseph, the head of Haitian Bridge Alliance, such a tireless advocate for Haitian immigrants who today are still being deported. We also have several other Black organizations where who are working very tirelessly on the issue of immigrants writ large, but also Black immigration. And to do this work, as I said, is very hard. And they always, what comes up in the advocate community is that we are tired. That we are tired when we feel alone. And that is why we have to work in community and also have faith in community and find new ways to push through and support each other. And it is in that way where you come in, where we have to have faith in oneself. Faith in oneself to be an advocate is important. Many people I know in the US tell me that they can't be an advocate because they don't have a story to tell. They don't have a personal mission. You don't need to have an interesting story to advocate. You don't have to have my story about a war and a tsunami and fleeing persecution. Wow, that's a lot of drama for one person. No. All you need to do to be an advocate is to care. Care about an issue, care about other people. How can I so easily see that? When we know that we need to center the voices of people most directly impacted in our advocacy. The answer is easy. You can be an advocate ally. Think of a choir. Sometimes there are solo parts, and other times there is the chorus. But no matter what part you play, you must sing in tune, otherwise it's awful. It's the same with advocacy. You can play many parts, but you need to work together. How do you become a good advocate ally? You become this where you make sure you support and amplify the voices of others rather than drown them out. And you do this, the answer to this question is through empathy. I like Brené Brown's definition of empathy. In her book, Atlas of the Heart, she says, I quote, "We need to dispel the myth that empathy is walking in someone else's shoes. Rather than walking in your shoes, I need to learn how to listen. Learn how to listen to the story you are about to tell me. Learn how to listen to the story of what it is like to be in your shoes. And believe, even when it does not match my experiences." We need to learn to leave our assumptions at the door and believe others who might not look like us or have our experiences. By caring deeply enough and being open enough to getting to know other experiences, you can be an ally and an advocate. As I said at the beginning, advocacy is not easy. You can be a veteran advocate or a rookie, and you will still make mistakes, and you might not do it right. But the important thing is that you believe in yourself as an advocate. You believe that you can learn, you can grow, you can change, and you can be a better advocate. But most importantly, what you must believe is that your voice is important. Your voice needs to be heard, both for yourself as well as to amplify others. And therefore, you cannot sit on the sidelines. I've been talking about many countries and advocacy and giving you advocacy examples from around the world. But I don't want you to think that faith and advocacy is important only in places that are far away with faraway people. No, I can give you an example where we advocates used faith in oneself, faith in others, and faith in the process of advocacy itself in our work in Washington, D.C. Just last month, on August 7th, it was a Sunday, and yes, the Senate was working on a Sunday, to get the Inflation Reduction Act passed. It was a must-pass bill. It is an act that focused on tax and climate issues. There were no immigration policies in this bill. And our job as immigrant advocates was not to get any positive immigration policies in the bill, but to keep negative immigration policies out of the bill. Because if this bill was going to pass, as I said, it was a must-pass bill, and there were any negative policy riders attached to that, it could set us back in immigration policy for years. So all of us policy advocates worked very hard. And then on August 7th at 2 a.m., the Senate was working at 2 a.m., it was crunch time. The bill was on the floor for a vote, and then a senator introduced a negative immigration amendment. And to our horror, the parliamentarian, and the parliamentarian is someone who sets some of the rules in the Senate, the parliamentarian had declared that this amendment needed only 50 votes to pass, instead of the 60 that we hoped for. Again, as I said, it was 2 a.m., but there were 30 immigrant advocates on a Zoom call. We're all doing this by Zoom. And at that time, it was a moment of faith. Number one, we had all believed in ourselves. We had showed up. We had worked so hard to advocate and make sure that the senators knew that it was important that no negative immigration policies were on this. Number two, we had faith in our community. We know that we each carried the water, that we all worked together. And so all we had to do now was to have faith in the process. And for 10 excruciating minutes, that is all we did. We just sat and listened. And our faith was justified. The amendment did not pass. There were no anti-immigrant amendments at all that were passed that night, and we finally had a good piece of legislation. It was great. It was a lot of work, but it was great. Finally, why am I speaking to you about advocacy and faith in action now? Why is it important? It is important because after having advocated for many policies in many countries, some countries democratic and others not so, I believe that the United States has a unique system of representative democracy, where you, as the constituent, is the most important. The system of the United States, it is set up where the constituent has so much ability to influence. As you saw, there was a picture of my husband speaking on Congress. There is anybody, lots of people, any constituent can go up there and speak. When I first came to live in the United States in 2010, I was amazed. When a constituent, a mere student, wrote to a congressperson, that congressperson wrote back. Yes, it might have been the congressperson's intern who wrote back, and the letter might have been electronically signed, but still, you got a reply. And this is not usual. This is amazing. This is not usual at all, even in other democracies. In the UK, sometimes you get a reply, sometimes not. And definitely in the UK, you could not walk around the parliament, stopping by various committee rooms and listening to committee meetings like we do in DC. Some of y'all have been in DC, and you could still, I'm going on Tuesday for a committee room. There's nothing to stop you. But in the UK, you have to be invited. Therefore, this system is unique, and it must, in my thinking, it must be protected. After 12 years of living and working here, what worries me now is that the power of a constituent is lessening. It's getting less. While in 2010, as I said, you could write and a reply came quite promptly, within 2 weeks, now it takes almost 4 weeks or sometimes even longer. And it is hard. It is hard to get a constituent meeting with a senator, where 10 years ago, it was not that hard. There are many, many reasons for this, but I believe one of the reasons is because the constituent, that is, all of us in this room, the constituent of the senators, of the congresspeople, do not engage as much as they did before. This, of course, is a chicken and egg situation, where the constituent, and again, that is all of us, feel that we don't have the power. It is other powerful voices that can change things. So there's no point in engaging. But at the same time, if your congressperson does not hear from you, then you can't influence him or her. And they think you don't have the power either. Democracy is like a muscle. Unless you exercise it, it will not be strong. And given that the US has this unique system of representative government, if you don't use it, then it will not be strong. If you are not happy with the way Afghan immigrants were treated, the way other immigrants were treated, if issues, you have to get engaged in public life. If you have issues with the system, or even if you're happy with the system, please. The system will not work if it is not used. There will be glitches. There are millions of people around the world who would want this system, that they can engage in public life freely and safely without fear. Living in the US, you have the ability, you have that power where you can raise your voice without being attacked or without worrying that your family will be attacked. So we cannot lose this unique system. We cannot lose it because of apathy or fear. Therefore, I ask you, get engaged in public life, whatever it is, here on campus, outside, whether it's small, in a state, county, whether it's bigger, get engaged in any way. If you don't know how, you can ask me. I'm sure there are many people on campus that you can do too. But democracy needs you to be engaged. Democracy in the United States needs you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ronnate, for that empowering talk. People in the room, you get first say at questions because you came and joined us. Does anyone have any questions? Be brave. Oh, yeah.
In your time advocating for immigration policy, how much of it is spent on the Hill? Or is most of it the work off Hill and then...
I'm sorry, as opposed to?
As opposed to like most of the work off Hill behind the scenes and then you present it to members of Congress?
So most of the work in this sense is on the Hill. It's basically also a lot of talking to staffers of members of Congress, as well, so then advocating with them for different policies, and then there will be maybe a presentation. So all of that work on a weekly basis, you know, if it's really busy on a weekly basis, I would say 30% of my time, 20 to 30% of my time.
Ronnate, could you maybe tell us, like, what does a typical day exist, and what does a typical day look like, if such a thing exists?
A typical day, yeah, I mean, it's a mix of, well, most of the time it's just meetings, and there's a lot of meetings, but it's a mix of meeting with other advocates, with immigrants, you know, with people, advocates in DC, advocates at the border, practitioners. So there's a mix of meeting with you know, fellow advocates, as well as, and of course, you know, fellow advocates and, you know, immigrants, as well as meeting with staffers. So if there's a particular bill, you know, so there's a particular bill coming up. It's not busy. It's not crazy. Then we would, a typical day would be, you know, first of all, you always have to check out the political news. That is a must, because things change quickly. You know, so there's, in DC, there are particular political news groups, so like CQ or other particular political things like that. So you check that out. You know, hopefully there's no surprises. You know what's happening. Then, you know, you might have set meetings with your fellow advocates, and then say you're, you know, thinking of proposing a bill or thinking of pushing something for appropriation. So that is budget, and that's something, you know, that's coming up. So right now, I hate to say this because I feel I'll jinx it, but we are not too busy. Like, we have like 3 bills coming up or anything like that. So we are focusing on appropriations. This is a, you know, something that's going to come up in the lame duck session. So we would then sort of have certain meetings. We would have, when advocates get together, we decide what we're going to push forward. It's not always the same thing. As I said, you don't have to always be doing the same thing. And then we will have these meetings. We will take time out to write some proposals, proposed language. And that would be a typical meeting a typical meeting, unless there's like something happens, like the immigrants being bused or something like that, then everything changes.
Thank you. Let's take a question from one of our Zoom participants. This is Lenore. Lenore, excuse me. What bills concerning immigrant rights should we be advocating for right now?
Right now, I would say definitely make sure that there is funding that support immigrants in the appropriations bills. There's also the Afghan Adjustment Act that is to support Afghans who were paroled into the country or who came into the country to be able to have a pathway to get legalization. Those are like the two top priority bills, I would say.
We'll get you the mic.
How would I, as a university student, stay informed? Where do I look for my news? How do I know what's going on in the world?
I think in terms of, if you want to know, say, what's going on in the immigration world, and again, like the person before us, what bills to support, what can they do? I would say for sure is to plug in to any of the immigrant advocacy groups, any group, like Network, like our group, like the group that I am a part of, or any of the immigrant groups and they send out newsletters, they send out little actions. We do that too. So Network sends out action alerts of, there's a bill coming up, or there's there's a need here. For example, there have been, immigrants bused to DC and there's a need. Or there's this other bill coming up on taxes and we need your support. So signing up to Network would be good to get your information like that.
I can personally attest that Network does not bombard you with emails. It's always very timely and prescient. So I second that. This actually kind of piggies onto a Zoom question. How can people get involved with the work that you do in DC, or is it possible to get involved outside of DC? If so, what could that volunteer work look like?
In terms of, I'm not sure, in terms of the question whether, it's to do with advocacy work or to do with direct service work. So in terms of both, though, and you don't have to be in DC to do advocacy work. Clearly, what is most needed is for your congressperson to hear from you, and that is outside of DC. Unfortunately, DC does not have a congressperson. So that is one thing to you will be able to do that from wherever you are, or even speak to your congressperson when they're in district. In terms of direct services as well, you don't need to be in DC. Immigrants in the US, they do, they're not just at the border or just in other in border states. There is a lot of need for support in other states as well. So I think to find an immigrant support network would be best in your state or where you live, and get involved.
Thank you. Any other questions in the room? Yes, Paul.
Thank you. This is not a question so much as following up on our speaker here and thinking, as you're asking, or some of you are asking, about how the many ways in which you can get involved in advocacy work. I'm going to speak for someone who's not here, though she may be online, and that's the director of our Humanitarian Action Program on campus. And we have a minor program in humanitarian action, and the director is Julie Mughal, who can be found in Canisius room 200. She's a dynamo, and she attracts people around her, and all kinds of advocacy work is done through that humanitarian action program. So yes, you can work on a big scale, but if you want a place to start, you could start in Canisius room 200.
Thank you. Other questions in the room? Not using your priority? Okay. There is a question about your husband. Is how is your husband now? How is life? How has it been since you got to the United States?
My husband is fine. Thank you for asking. It has been interesting since we got to the United States because I think that has been, in a ways, difficult transition. And when we think of immigrants, I hope that we think of them as a whole, as people with many facets, and the transition, has been that that has had its ups and downs, because as immigrants, as you all can imagine, the system is different, but also you are always fearful of, are you going to do something wrong? Are you because you don't know the system. This is unfamiliar, and the narratives around immigrants today is also creating that fear. So this is clearly, something that all immigrants, not all, but most immigrants, I believe, go through, and we can, only be able to overcome that through the support and change of the narrative about immigrants, and working with immigrants and looking at them as people with many facets.
I will use my role as moderator to ask a two-part question. What is the most challenging part of your work? And then the flip side of that, what is your favorite part of your work?
I think the most challenging part of the work is clearly, what I'm supposed to do, which is support the passage and the passage of positive immigration policy. So that is extremely challenging. And again, it is challenging mainly because of the narrative, I would say. But you take the wins, like not getting anything in this bill is a win, and it's a negative win, but it's still a win. So you have to take the win, and you have to plod on constantly. That is the way advocacy works. It's an everyday building up of stone after stone, so that you can make a mountain. And so that is the most challenging. What is the most positive thing, I think, is two. In my work, I get to meet a lot of other people who are not like me, who are the immigrants, who are not immigrants. I get to talk and understand and find out and get to know them better. And so that is a positive. The other positive is that, that there is, and this I believe truly, as I said, that there is ways of change. When the change comes, or when you have, you've got a little policy, you've worked so hard, and you've got just a sentence in a bill that becomes an act. It is so joyous. That has happened to me 3 times. I'm like, oh, this sentence is now the law of this land. can you imagine this, this refugee who's got this? This is so powerful. It's going to be there forever. I'm going to show my grandchildren. So that is, I think, a very positive, and that this is what keeps me going, and many other advocates as well.
Thank you so much. I think now it would be a good time to say thank you again for coming up here and for giving us your time and telling us your story and telling us how we can get involved. Thank you very much. So let's say thank you to Ronnate.